At about 10 p.m. local time on October 12, 1974, a four-engine Air Force plane radioed its position from inside a Typhoon and was never heard from again. No mayday, no wreckage, no survivors. 6 men vanished over the South China Sea doing a job that only a handful of air crews on Earth were trained to do, flying directly into the eye of a tropical cyclone. Today, more than 50 years later, nobody has ever found Swan 38. What I want to know is what actually happened in those final minutes. Why an aircraft this well flown by this experienced a crew simply disappeared, and why, after half a century, the wreck has never turned up. I went through the investigation record, the storm data, and the search reports to get this right, and some of what I found surprised me. Swan 38 was not some rookie crew on a routine flight. It belonged to the 54th Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, the Typhoon Chasers, based at Andersen Air Force Base on Guam. Their entire job was flying into storms that every other aircraft on the planet was trying to avoid. The aircraft itself was a Lockheed WC-130 Hercules, tail number 650965, a 4-engine turboprop modified specifically for weather reconnaissance missions, allowing crews to penetrate tropical cyclones and measure winds, pressure, and storm structure. Originally built as a C-130H transport before conversion for this kind of mission and handed to the 54th, it was, by every account, a solid airplane flown by a professional squadron. In early 1974, a tropical system east of the Philippines organized into what would become Typhoon Bess. It crossed northern Luzon on October 11th as a typhoon, dumping torrential rain. Some locations reportedly received more than 30 inches of rain. Flooding and landslides killed 26 people on the island. The storm weakened slightly over land, then moved back over the South China Sea and began to reorganize. By the 12th, Bess had regained typhoon strength, sustained winds above 65 miles an hour. Not the biggest storm the squadron had ever flown into, not even close. This is part of what makes the case strange. Bess was, in the words of investigators who reviewed it afterward, not particularly intense compared with many typhoons routinely sampled by the squadron, yet still capable of severe turbulence. Swan 38 took off from Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines that night with 6 men aboard. The pilot, Captain Edward Bushnell, along with First Lieutenants Gary Crass, Michael O'Brien, and Timothy Hoffman, and enlisted crew members Technical Sergeant Kenneth Sir and Sergeant Detlef Ringler. Their job was to fly a set pattern around and through the storm, called an alpha pattern, penetrating the eye wall to get a fix on the center, then circling the periphery to map the storm structure before penetrating again. It was routine, dangerous, and something this squadron had done successfully many times before. They completed the first penetration without incident. Radio reports came back normal. They flew most of the alpha pattern as briefed. Then, around 10 p.m., roughly 400 miles northwest of Clark Air Base, as they turned back inbound for a second pass through the eye to confirm the storm's position, Swan 38 made its final radio call. And then, nothing. No distress call. No garbled transmission cut short. No emergency beacon. The aircraft simply stopped talking. In an aircraft built for exactly this kind of flying, crewed by people trained for exactly this kind of emergency, there was no warning at all. The lack of any distress call suggests whatever happened may have unfolded extremely rapidly. When ground control couldn't raise the aircraft, the response was immediate. Air Force and Navy aircraft, along with USS White Plains, were dispatched to comb the area where Swan 38's last position report placed it, in the storm's periphery over the South China Sea. For 4 days, crews flew search patterns over open water in the aftermath of the same typhoon that had swallowed the plane, scanning for wreckage, rafts, anything. What they found amounted to almost nothing. A survival radio, some soundproofing material, fragments of orange cushion-like debris consistent with life vests or seat cushions. That was it. No fuselage section, no engine, no bodies. After 4 days, the search was called off. and all 6 men were officially listed as missing and later presumed dead. So, what actually happened up there? The official investigation board never reached a firm conclusion, but their working theory pointed towards severe turbulence and structural failure in the Typhoon as a plausible explanation. It's worth pausing on what that actually means. A WC-130 is a rugged aircraft, built to take a beating. But inside an eye wall, updrafts and downdrafts can exceed anything a pilot can compensate for. And if the aircraft was caught in a severe enough shear or downburst, it's plausible the airframe simply couldn't hold together. That would also explain the total silence. A sudden structural failure at altitude, at night, inside a storm, can happen fast enough that a crew never gets a call-out. The strongest alternative theory discussed by aviation historians was the plausibility of a controlled flight into the ocean following an unrecoverable extreme downdraft. That would likely have meant the aircraft survived the turbulence, lost altitude rapidly, and impacted the ocean intact, sinking without leaving floating wreckage. But plausible is not proven. The aircraft was not equipped with the kind of crash-protected flight recorder common on modern airliners. Nobody has a single confirmed piece of the fuselage. Everything about the cause of Swan 38's loss is inference built on storm physics and a scattering of debris, not hard evidence. And that debris question matters more than it might seem. If the aircraft broke up violently in the air, you might expect a wider debris field and more identifiable wreckage, larger sections, not just soundproofing and cushion fragments. Although, in some cases, there is surprisingly little debris. The lack of anything substantial has left room, even decades later, for people to wonder whether Swan 38 went down largely intact, striking the water hard enough to leave little on the surface, rather than shedding pieces across the sky. Nobody has ever gone back to look. This isn't a case like Malaysian flight MH370, chased by governments and private companies with tens of millions of dollars on the table. Swan 38 disappeared with no debris trail to reverse engineer a crash site, the way investigators did with MH370's flaperon, or have the satellite data to locate. The search area was defined by a single spoken position report from a pilot in a storm at night over featureless ocean. That gives you a search radius measured in tens of miles at best, in water that, in parts of the South China Sea, runs thousands of feet deep. There has never been a serious modern deep-sea search for Swan 38. No towed sonar survey, no autonomous underwater vehicles combing a defined search box. A memorial scholarship was established in the crew's honor, and a plaque went up on the squadron building at Andersen Air Force Base. Swan 38 remains the only WC-130 ever lost flying a storm, and one of only a small handful of hurricane and typhoon reconnaissance aircraft lost in the entire history of the mission. 6 men flew into a typhoon to do their job and never came out the other side. Swan 38 is still out there, waiting for someone to look.